almost showtime. 1 minute
It
to go.
is. 1 minute. We're having a countdown.
Ronnie's not bothered. It's just like I do this like every day sort of thing. Mary's crapping it.
Well, I'm nervous. You get used to it though. You got no choice now. You're here. You got to do
I know. We're in it. Right. Okay.
It's like 100-miler.
I'm gonna press start. Welcome everybody. I can see lots and lots of numbers going up, so I'll just give it a minute or so before we kick things off. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us this evening. So if you have just signed on, there's a little chat button on the bottom menu of your screen. If you guys can hear me, can you just type a yes in the chat button or a hello, just so I know? Awesome, thank you very much. That's brilliant, thank you. Great, well, I'll start talking just so we can get some housekeeping bits going. So as I said, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Mary. I'm the brand development manager for Harrier. We've got Kate signed on, and we've got Ronnie Staton joining us, who's going to be talking to us in a little bit. And we're all really excited that you've joined us. And we're really excited about this 100-mile pack that we've put together. So if you've not seen it on Harrier's website yet, do have a look. We've got the first module that will be coming your way very soon. This evening's talk is going to be really interesting, really useful. So if you're looking for a race to book, haven't booked a race, you'll find lots of good tips. But Ronnie's going to talk more generally about running 100-milers as well. So yeah, it's going to be really great. So few housekeeping notes. First of all, I've checked, you guys can all hear me. That's brilliant. I'm not anticipating any technical hitches, but if anything does occur, please bear with me, and I'll sort them out as quickly as I can. If you guys have any questions at any point as we're going along, if you could please type it in the Q&A section, not in the chat, but on the bottom menu, you've got a little button that says Q&A. Type it in there. And Ronnie will be answering some questions as we go along, and then we'll answer some at the end as well. But if it just comes into your head, type it there and we'll get to it. So I have a little poll to get things started. And I wish I could take credit for this, but I'm going to launch it now. It's a funny question. This is from one of our content creators. Would you rather run 50 miles handcuffed to your ex-partner or 100 miles handcuffed to your ex-mother-in-law? And Frenchie said that he would pick the one that he liked the least to run the 100-miler with, because he knew they would suffer more. So oh, this is interesting. I'll share the poll in a minute once you've all had a chance to participate. I don't know what I would choose. I think we've got a clear winner here. What do you guys think? It's actually ex-partner. That's surprising. Brilliant. So I'm going to stop sharing that now. If you guys are new to Harrier, I don't know how many of you have been wearing our kit for a little while, or if we're a new brand to you. But I think I just want to say thanks very much for your support. We're really, like I said before, we're really excited about this new resource, and Ronnie and Dan Summers, who has also been working with us on it. Thank you so much to you guys for lending your expertise. If you guys are on the lookout for your kit for race day, do check out Harrier's website. We've got some fantastic ultra bundles, which are a great shout because you get your race vest, your poles, your hydration, and all your safety essentials included in that. And you get a nice little discount on it as well because you save 15%. So do check that out. And yeah, I've got another poll before I hand over to Ronnie, and that is just about your experience level. So we're really curious to know what you guys are training for at the moment. If you're new to ultra running, if you're training for your first 100 mile, or maybe you've run 100 miles before and you're doing something a lot more technical, it would be really cool to get an idea of where you guys are. And then Ronnie can use that to tailor tonight's talk. So I'll give you guys a minute or so to answer, and then we'll go from there. Cool. So Ronnie, you'll be able to see, I think we got a lot of beginners on this call, which is great. So people new to ultra running, so that's really cool. And some people training for their first 100 miler as well. So that's awesome. All right, I'm gonna stop sharing that. And now, finally, I'm gonna stop talking and I'm gonna hand over to our guest speaker. So thanks, Ronnie, for joining us. For those of you who don't know Ronnie, he's an ultra running coach, and he's also the race director of Hobo Race or Hobo Pace events. They organize the Robin Hood 100, which for you newbies out there, it's a really good first 100 miler to do. Ronnie's got a degree in coaching, sport, and exercise science, and he's also qualified in cognitive behavioral therapy. He hosts an online seminar called The Positive Runner regularly. So do check that out, guys, because it's a really good session to help runners progress mentally as well as physically. I did it last year, and I can't tell you, it absolutely transformed my thinking of my running. So it's really good. Over the last decade, Ronnie's been working to help hundreds of ultra runners from around the UK tackling races, anything from 30 miles up to 300 miles. But he also loves running long himself. So he's completed multiple 100-mile events. He's successfully run across England, Wales, and Scotland in the nonstop format. And we thought, hey, there is no one better to chat to you about preparing for this ultra distance than Ronnie. So without further ado, Ronnie Staton.
There probably is someone better than me, but you've got me. So we'll make do with what we have. That's all part of it. Thank you for that very kind introduction, Mary. Yeah, my personal running experience certainly helps me to understand how to prepare and how to run long distances, but I'm certainly talking more from a coaching standpoint this evening. You know, I don't walk around with a badge of authority just because I run long distances. I know how to tell you to do it. It comes from my coaching. It comes from my experience over the last 8 years working with ultra runners, seeing how they prepare and how they execute race day strategies. So a whole wealth of information. And as for myself personally, I don't consider myself an elite runner. I don't find ultra running particularly easy, and I wouldn't say I'm excessively talented in it, which I do believe plays into my strengths as a coach, is that I've always known how to get the best out of myself. And I think within the runners that I work with as well, to get the very best performances out of those individuals. So could you bring the first slide up, actually, Mary, while I'm talking about this? Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's the only slide, so it's certainly not death by PowerPoint or anything, but very simple. It'll help us put things into perspective. These are independent factors, really, that when I was writing a flowchart originally, this was looking at the entire stepping stones from a relatively new ultra runner right the way to a 100-miler. And it occurred to me when I was writing that flow chart, well, hang on a minute, this assumes that they've picked their 100-mile event. And I actually ended up drawing a flow chart within that flow chart. So Mary decided, you know what, this looks better as itself, as a flow chart, considerations to a 100-miler, and the rest got chucked into the checklist. So the checklist is on the Harrier's website as well, and it can definitely be used in conjunction with this flow chart if you are deciding upon a 100-mile event. Now, what I would say is when most people come to me as a coach, they have already chosen their ultra or their 100-mile event. And I think this evening, again, every time I say 100-mile event, that is synonymous with ultra, whether that be 30-mile or, you know, anything up to the 100 or potentially over as well. So synonymous with the 100-mile there. Because some of you obviously will have picked your event and you're just hoping to glean a little bit of advice and some insight from this evening, which I will hope you get, because as I've planned this, I've tried to open out to, in case that you have already selected your event. You'll see these independent factors, but they're all interdependent. They all rely upon one another, and the why you choose the event that you choose should depend really on your answers to the other questions. You know, the terrain might suit, it might be fairly local to you. So all these things, and we'll perhaps revisit at the end of my talk, they should feed into the why. Why would you pick this race? And it will form into the reasons of which we have considered there. Don't expect perfect. When you're looking for your first event, you're going to have to make some kind of sacrifice or compromise. It might be the terrain that you want, and it might be when you want it. However, they might not allow crew, or the cutoffs might be quite tight. So you're not looking to tick the box of every single consideration. You're just looking what fits best for you, and look at it from that perspective. So, but there's no real order to this as well. And my mind is pretty random and spits things out in random order. And I talk back to front, and you'll probably notice that as well. However, I don't believe it's all my fault. This is lots of little bits of information. It's the nature of the beast. So please hang on as I go through it. It was very difficult to pick any logical order, so I just went in any old order. So I started with the why. We'll just keep this up for a while longer, Mary. And then once I'm done with the why, they can just look at my ugly mug. But the why, I started with the why because I think that is the most important area. We could open this out and say, why ultra run in the first place? It'd be a very good question. I think it would be for personal considerations, whether you want to get into ultra running, and it looks a lot of you are on the fence at the moment and looking whether to get into the real long distance game of 100 miles. I would say 100-mile it's the heart of ultra running, really. It's that real centerpiece of ultra running. Of course, it goes way beyond, and the multi-day stuff, and there's a lot of ultras and great races below that. But I think for most people getting into ultra running, perhaps aspire to the 100-mile distance. And there's a very good reason for that. It's an amazing distance and will always be a great achievement, no matter how ultra running and 100-mile runs grow exponentially in the amount of people that run them. It will always be a very long way, and it will always be a great achievement. So you can see why people want to run these. But I think individually, if you're thinking about getting into 100-mile running, you perhaps want to look at, can you dedicate the time to it? Ultra running takes a lot of time. It's the frequency and how regularly you run and the volume that you run. You have to dedicate it. You live, you breathe it. You know, it has to become your passion. It has to become almost your life's purpose to do well in a 100-miler. So make sure you're passionate about it and you love it. But reasons I see as a coach, people run for health, fitness, for challenge, for achievement, midlife crisis maybe. There's definitely some of them occurring, perhaps guilty of that a little bit myself. Adventure, especially with trail running, adventure is a massive reason why you would get into ultra running. Mental well-being, you know, it's ubiquitous now. Anywhere you look, the positive benefits of running for our mental well-being, and rightly so. And focus, you know, if you're focused on a big event, on an ultra, that focus that gives you in your life can drip out into all different areas in your life, in your work, in your relationships, in your family, and have a positive influence on your entire life. So hopefully I've sold ultra running to everybody there. It's the greatest sport in the land, and in my view, everybody should be doing it. But specifically on why you would choose the event that you are going to, there are a few factors that you would want to consider, and we're looking right at it, that all the other factors feed into the why of where it is. But common reasons that I see are perhaps recommendations from other runners. When I set the Robin Hood 100 up, I did set it up with the novice ultra runner in mind. Of course, not really the novice runner, but under the assumption that you are doing some kind of longer distance running and you're stepping up for the first time to the 100-mile distance. And the way that that's geared up, you might have a lot of aid stations, the routes marked, and a simpler route. So if you're looking for your first 100-miler, they're the kind of things that you'd want: regular aid stations, not too arduous terrain and all the rest of it. But we're going to go through those things. Perhaps it's local to you. If it's local, you might get to train on it more, get the specificity of the route, be able to recce it. Maybe a certain race sparks a certain degree of interest within you. So that's always a great race to book. If something really catches your interest and captures your imagination, that's a great race for you to do. Maybe it's a dream race. Maybe it's the race that you first heard of when you was just running standardized distances, and it made you think, wow, there's this thing called ultra running. And maybe that's a long-term goal, and it's not something you can do as your first 100-miler. Maybe you need points for it. Maybe you just need a lot more experience. But a dream race is, again, a great reason to pick a certain event. But any of these factors, maybe it just suits you on several different levels. And while we're talking about why choose an event and why ultra run, it's worth considering that having a why definitely makes you stronger as an ultra runner. If you know why you're doing it and you know why you want to finish, it's absolutely going to give you a better chance of reaching that finish line. It's down to the philosophers to discuss and debate whether man should give life meaning or not, but it's certainly an ultra running. If you lack a why and you lack that meaning of purpose of why you're doing it, you will struggle at 2 a.m. when it's raining and you're shivering cold and you're lost and your head torch has just gone out. You're perhaps going to need a why to get yourself back en route and get yourself running again. So thinking about why you want to do it is what you want to do. Obviously, some people find a bigger cause than themselves. That's a great way to do it. Maybe they raise money for charity or run in memory for somebody, but finding that why. And the further you go, if you go on to things like 200 milers and 300 milers, you'll tend to find that your why needs to grow in relationship to how arduous that event is. So if you drop that slide now, Mary, I think we've had enough of that. They're going to have to look at me, bless them. Okay, so on to the when. Can you prepare for it? You know, when is this event? So if you're reasonably experienced, and it looks from the poll, most of us are beginner runners here tonight, but if you're reasonably experienced, then 3 to 4 months is probably enough for you to target a 100-miler and do well, because your volume's probably pretty high all the time. So you can almost go straight into a peak phase and then hit that event. I like 4 months because I coach in 8-week blocks, so that would give you two solid training blocks, and obviously include your taper within that. However, if you are running 30 milers at the moment, potentially a 50, then you're perhaps looking more like 6 months. I would think you would want your event from present day to be able to ensure you are prepared fully. Now, we don't live in an ideal world, so That doesn't necessarily happen. And as a coach, all the time, runners are reaching out to me with event ideas. The events are where they are. So sometimes you have to try and make it fit best you can. But if we're talking about your first 100 miler, which is what the talk is geared up to, then of course you almost want to be able to sit back, look for the events that would suit you best and book in advance, and within 6 months start to train with that. In my coaching, I use something called a reverse calendar, which is work backwards. Again, my mind kind of is backwards, so it suits me just perfectly. You look from your event and you work backwards until you get to present day. The reason we go backwards is if you go forwards from now to the event, you just make it fit. But you get a more honest appraisal if you move backwards and visualize. When somebody asks me, can I do this on this date? I'll bring up the calendar, I'll look at that date, and in my mind's eye, I'll visualize back what training they have to do. And if we don't get to the present day by the time they've done everything I've visualized, we might have a problem. That can be sometimes tailored and that can work. And sometimes I think we're going to have an honest conversation. Really, this race, this event is too close. So the reverse calendar is a good thing for you to do to move backwards. The actual event date is important as well. What's your work commitments like around that time? What's your workload like? Can you get childcare? Can you get support? If you want a support crew, are your support crew available on that date? These are all things that I commonly see as a race director and as a coach overlooked. And then there's a panic as the event approaches. So really try and figure out, does this event sit well with my personal life as well? What season is it in? You know, is it in winter? Is it going to be cold? Is it in summer? Could it be potentially really hot? What are the underfoot conditions like? Is it going to be dry? Is it going to be muddy and wet? Daylight hours. If you're going towards a winter 100 miler, it feels as though it's nothing but darkness. If you run a summer 100 miler, it's barely dark. And if it's a full moon as well, you might never touch your head torch. So the darkness can be a difficult factor when you've never run a 100 miler. So of course, I would be advising as your first one, perhaps edge towards nicer weather if you can in the summer. Although you can have nicer, calmer weather in the winter and have a downpour in summer, and it still gets really cold at night. So you're not guaranteed temperature, but you are guaranteed daylight. So that's worth thinking about. One final factor is with when it is and your schedules, is there something called the minimum maximum. Now, when I say minimum maximum, that hurts my head because obviously that's two opposites in the same sentence. But what it means, if you take the maximum period, the peak phase where you would be doing your maximum work, and you look at what you would have to do as a minimum to be ready and prepared for the event. So to put it in say it another way that hopefully makes sense, look at your peak phase, which might be 8 to 10 weeks before your event, and look at the minimum you'd have to do, and can you commit to that? For a 100 miler, I think you're looking at about 8 to 10 hours per week in that peak phase that hopefully you could commit to. It's a lot less than what people would imagine it to be. It doesn't have to be massive volume to get you through really well on a 100 miler, nor does the long run have to be really all that long as well. But that'll send me off onto a massive tangent and I can't go there this evening. But just to say, there is no real prerequisite distance that you must have run to run a 100 miler. The races themselves might have that, so that's what you'd have to look at. I don't have it for my 100 miler because I've had mates come and finish the Robin Hood 100 miler that weren't even technically ultra runners. So that's the proof in the pudding for me that if you train well and you commit to it and you've got a why and you put yourself through it on the day, you can actually finish it. You don't have to have run a 50 miler, 60 miler, and it's nothing like marathon running where you might have had to have done a long run of 20 mile to get through the 26. You're not trying to run 80 to do 100. So the minimum maximum is worth considering because that would affect where you put your event. if you've got a really busy spell, don't put your 100 miler just after that, because your busy spell would be in your peak phase. So try and find some different event. Location. Okay, so where in the world is it? It's obvious, but where in the world is it? Now, because we've mostly got beginners, is perhaps not worth dwelling on, but environmental factors would come into play if you was going different places in the world, whether it's just been the MDS, Marathon des Sables, for instance. You'd have to acclimatize to the heat. It could be a cold ultra, an Arctic ultra, where you'd have to learn how to look after your extremities and use a stove in the cold and everything. And also altitude. Basically, don't pick any of those events as your first 100 miler. You don't need to be acclimatizing to altitude on your first 100 miler, in my view, and nor maybe would you be able to enter it because of the prerequisites hopefully the event would have on that, because it's more dangerous. We can't get away from COVID. It's not disappeared. So check out, is there any travel restrictions? And of course, if you are going further afield, make sure you've got your travel documents and your passports, and do that early on. There's nothing like an iron in the works like not having a passport when you need one. So the other major consideration with location is how far away is it from you, or how far away are you from it? Because when you're in your specific phase, in your peak phase, it's great to run on the terrain or similar terrain that you'd be on. Most of us are not going to be able to actually run on the race route. You know, that's an ideal world type thinking, but we're going to book races further afield. So, but we need to try and simulate the training area and the training environment. So if you do live closer to it, obviously you can get to it some weekends or some longer runs. And also, if you're wanting to recce it, the closer it is, the more likely that is to actually happen. I've seen a lot of runners with all the best intentions wanting to recce their 100 miler and not recce it. My advice, if you are going to recce it, start at the back, start at the finish, and do the back first. It's this whole reverse thing again, but it works because the amount of people I've seen recce the first 50 miles because they want to do it in order, and then the best laid intentions fall through and they can't get to recce the second 50 miler. What you've actually done there is you've recce'd the part of the route which is going to be in daylight. You're going to be fresh. You're going to be surrounded by runners. There's going to be a lot of support around. There's not much time for markings to be removed. And then the second 50 that you haven't recce'd is at night time. You're getting fatigued. The field's spread out, so there's no one around you, and there's longer for the markings to have been removed. It makes no logical sense. And when you're breaking a route down to recce it, you don't really feel the flow like you do when you go on a 100-mile run anyway. So you'll have to believe me on that, but you may as well recce, for instance, the last 20 miles first. That's when you're going to be at your most tired. So do it in reverse. Unless you are absolutely super confident and have it booked in your diary, then go for it in order. But unless you're very, very confident, I would do it in reverse. And again, your location of the event will affect your event logistics in terms of, will the people that you want to crew for you be happy going that distance to the event if it's much further afield? If you pick an ultra, the tip of Scotland, and you're from Essex, and then you ask your wife or your husband or whatever to come up there and crew you, you got to maybe think that through a little bit. So will people come and support you, and how will you get there? How are you going to get there on the day? Is there public transport? These are all things that matter. The amount of times I've had an email on the Friday before the start of Robin Hood 100 on the Saturday from a runner realizing that there's no taxis to get them to the start, despite it even being on the website and in all the notes they get. They've got a train to Retford, then tried to book a taxi and realize they can't, and they're emailing me to try and sort them a lift. You don't need it before a 100-mile race. So The location, the nature of trail running is often they're in smaller locations. There might be limited parking. It might be difficult to get there. You might need to be dropped off. If you need to be dropped off, it means you need to be picked up, and you're going to need somebody to do that. So bear all that in mind when you're thinking about your location. Okay, terrain. So terrain, what's the terrain like? You know, is it mountainous? Is it hilly? Is it flat? What's it like underfoot? Can you train on similar terrain? That's the big question. And how difficult will it be for you to train on similar terrain? If not, can you simulate it some way locally? For instance, can you do hill reps to get enough ascent and descent similar to the race? Being from Lincoln, that's something I do a lot. It's a really good job. I'm stupid, so I can just run up and down a hill for hours on end and not really be that bothered. In fact, I think I forget rep by rep. So you're going to need to simulate your terrain if you can't get to it. But you might have to commit more time to travel to the mountains if it's a mountainous race to get the actual specific terrain in there. So consider what terrain's like. Obviously, again, I've got to kind of encourage that you pick an easier terrain for your first 100, really. A lot of people do things like Lakeland 100 as their first 100 miler, but a lot of them also do not finish the Lakeland 100, and a lot of them have not even gone to recce it. They're normally from London way, but I'll leave it at that and not go on about that. So if just to say, you don't need to limit yourself with the terrain and the land that you live in to what you book. So it's not where you're from that counts. What matters is, are you fit and are you conditioned? So you put all your efforts into your training. If you live in a flat area like I do, you can still go and do pretty well in the mountains and in the hills. So don't book an event just because that terrain is not on your doorstep. It's your fitness and your conditioning that counts. If someone lives in the mountains but they don't train well, you've got a better chance than them trying to simulate the terrain and then go in really fit. So don't let it limit you, but you might just have to work harder to simulate it and get to the hills and get to the mountains to do it. I've coached no end of people that have done really, really well in the hills that are from the flat like I am. So underfoot surface as well. Is it tarmac? Is it concrete? Is it hard trail? You know, is it going to be really hard on your joints, or is it softer? These are kind of things that you need to be considering. Terrain, I would put format in that as well. What format is the race? Because it could be loops, which loops would be great in terms of you not getting lost and taking that pressure off you, but then you get the other side of it being difficult to keep running around a 3-mile loop. Is it linear? Or is it an out and back? So you do in reverse everything you did out there. That matters to terrain, because obviously any ascent on that loop, if it is a loop, you're doing every single lap. And how will you cope with that kind of thing? And do you need to improve your skills? If it is in arduous terrain, do you need to see a mountain leader, a mountain guide, and get better at those type of skills? So all considerations of the terrain. Okay, navigation, we're nearly there. Navigation, is it marked or is it not marked? The thing is, if it is marked, I would say that's a better event for a first timer to be doing. But you've got to add the massive caveat to that, is that no race director can entirely make sure that their 100-mile course is marked and vandals haven't come and removed marking. So you always have to remember, even when a route is marked, you are responsible for your navigation and you need a backup. Now, I'm a little bit of a Luddite with technology, but even I can use GPX. So get it on your watch or get it on a handheld Garmin or what have you, but back the route up and get on board with it. It still amazes me how many runners have still not quite gone over to using GPS devices and GPX. if I can do it, you can do it. It's so simple, and it will stop you getting lost. If the tape has gone, you cannot 100% bank on tape being there. The race directors do all they can, but it can be a long way, and it's just impossible. I've had kids sat in hedges, having moved an arrow to send runners the wrong way, giggling in the hedge. And you know what? I can't even really be mad about that. But then I've also had people remove 2-3 miles of the route and not only take it down, but actually reroute it to send people the wrong way. I'm a little bit more annoyed when somebody does that. But the point is, have your GPX and have your backup. And the other consideration is, if the tape is gone or the arrows are gone, how difficult is the navigation then? So on the Robin Hood, 13 miles of it, and therefore back as well, because it's an out, a loop round Sherwood Forest and then back. Well, the canal you can't get lost on. So I only put arrows out on there. And that's the other important thing, is how is the route marked, and know how it is marked so you know what you're looking for. If you're looking for tape every few hundred yards and the race director said, listen, I've only taped the corners, then you're going to start panicking. So you need to know how it is marked as well. But if the tape is removed or the arrows are removed, how difficult is it to navigate then? So again, I'd be advising you try and get an easier terrain and topography to navigate in case that's gone. And again, similar with the terrain and perhaps seeing a mountain guide, do you need navigation help? Could you improve your navigation skills? And it need not be map and compass. Ultra runners don't really use map and compass, but having a bit more directional awareness could be beneficial for you. Okay, supported or unsupported? Are you allowed a crew? Before you even ask yourself that question, are you allowed a crew? Unfortunately, a lot of trail events get a lot of pressure when crews are in excessive numbers, and sometimes have to bang crews and stop crews because it's congesting smaller villages and areas. And also, unfortunately, crews, well, it's the few that do it, but they break rules. And so if a race director says, don't go to that village, and crews do, they kind of have to veto all crews because the residents have got the power to potentially stop the race, and that would be very sad for the race not to live on. So crews, perhaps as ultra running gets more popular, crews might subside, and we might not have as many races being able to be crewed. But for the moment, a lot of them do allow crew as long as you behave. So picking your crew, ideally when you pick your crew, they get it. And when I mean get it, I mean they understand what ultra running is. They understand that you might get a little bit moody, you might get a little bit tired, and you might not look all that well. I've seen parents of runners talk them out continuing for 5 or so miles to the finish because they looked unwell. You do not want a crew that is going to be nice to you like that. They could have nursed him after he finished, but you want a crew that gets it, that you're going to look pretty terrible, but yet you've got it within you to carry on. So perhaps a little bit of tough love. It might not be your family that's best for it. Potentially pick a friend who doesn't really like you would probably be ideal there. Be clear with what you want from them, and make sure you do what you say you'll do for them. Be informative, make sure they know the rules, make sure they know the aid stations and all the timings, and you've given them all the kit. Put it on a plate for them. They're doing a massive favor for you. You need to go out of your way to make sure their life is as easy as it can be. It's the same as with a pacer. If you get a pacer, make sure they get it, make sure they're fit, make sure they're allowed, make sure they're fit, make sure they're self-supported. I've seen pacers ruin ultra runners races because the pacer is not fit enough to stick with the runner even in the latter 20 miles because the pacer thought, well, he's going to be absolutely knackered or she's going to just be walking, and then they're not, and then they're not fit enough to even keep with the person on the 100 miler. So make sure they get it. If the pacer does start slowing you down, make sure you leave them. just totally drop them. They're not doing you any favors. You obviously don't need them. You can patch any friendship up after you finish. Same for your crew. If you fall out with your crew, don't worry about it. Just fall out with them, finish the ultra, and then kiss and make up after. Do not stop an ultra to make up with your family or friends. They just are not worth it. You can do it after. Get your reward. You're there to finish an ultra. If you fall out with people, you just got to get on with it and get your medal. Then make friends with people after, but do not let it end your race. So crew can be really helpful, but bear in mind, you'll probably stop more often. So especially if your crew's not allowed at aid stations or coming in between aid stations, you'll often stop more frequently. That will add to your time. So just be careful of that, and don't rely on your crew. Sometimes crew aren't where you want them to be. They can't find the point. If they're not there, don't cry about it. You're the one in charge. You're the one who can make the magic happen. The crew are just there to be a help if possible. Last one, cut-offs. I feel like I'm under a bit of a cut-off right now. So cut-offs, are they generous or are they tight? Obviously, I'd be encouraging go towards a more generous cut-off if possible, and can you achieve them? Cut-offs are normally generous. They're there to hold a race together. So that's so the volunteers can go home after standing for 12 hours under a tree. The race has to come to an end at some point. So, and if they don't cut runners off, obviously they have to stand there for 16 hours to direct you or feed you or whatever. So they're there to hold the race together, not really to put pressure on you as a runner. Therefore, they are normally very generous, but there are one or two events, of course, that are slightly more advanced that will have perhaps notoriously a tighter cutoff. So you'd avoid them as your first one, ideally. Remember, the clock don't stop, okay? The clock does not stop. So when you're training, especially in your peak phase, I've heard there's something called Strava, and I think there's one or two runners on Strava. I'm not on it personally, but I think it has something called moving time where it stops if you stop. That's all well and good, and I'm not going to get into a rant about it, but you want to be focused on your elapsed time. It's your elapsed time that matters the most, and it's all that matters on ultras, on any race, of course, at the end of the day. So get used to working in your elapsed time, because that's the true picture of how long things are going to take. In your aid stations, learn to be efficient. There's a couple of ways that you can do that. You could wear a stopwatch, just like a little Casio watch, when you enter an aid station. This could be in your build-up events or on your main event, because you're going to love it so much. You're going to want to do other 100-mile races, so you want to get better and learn from this one. Start your stopwatch and time how long you are in that aid station before you move off. You'll be quite surprised how long you can be, and then with your crew as well, and that can end up hours over 100 miler. So be efficient. The other thing to watch out for as well, if you're giving yourself kind of process goals within your 100 miler, your outcome goal is finish, and I think that should be your only goal, not a time goal. But if you're saying I want to be at a station in 6 hours time, then it's when you leave that station, not when you arrive at that station. The amount of people I see land at a station, look at their watch, think, fantastic, I've got here in 5 hours 50, and kind of stop the watch or turn off mentally, stay there half an hour, and then look at the watch and think, well, now I've got 5 hours to the next one. Well, no, you haven't, because you've just lost 20 minutes by being in the aid station. So if you're using time goals, look at from when you leave that station, and then you get in the true picture. So if you got there in 5:50 and you was there for half an hour, it took you 6:20 to get to that station, and then you would count your time from that position. This gets people timed out, and this it gets people who miss their sub 24-hour goals because they're not being honest enough and brutal enough and calculating it correctly, and it makes them scratch their head why they can't keep an average of 4 miles per hour to do a sub 24 hour. And it's because they've never quite figured out all the stops within that. But yeah, that's me. That's my time there. I think I'm the Mary. You was too slow in the introduction because I'm on 46 there, and I didn't have a full 45. So I've done okay. I think I took 40 minutes there.
That's brilliant. Thanks so much, Ronnie. I do have a few questions, so I'm going to throw back to you. Thanks everybody for typing in your questions while Ronnie's been talking. The first one is from Lemon, I think it is. I'm easing into, if I share it live, can you see it? I'm easing into my first 100-mile ultra in May and May 2023, that is, making the sensible choice and going for a 10-mile loop by 10 event. Do you have any tips for tent base camp setup and indeed any other race tips?
Yeah, definitely lots. I mean, with your kit, have your kit in little bags labeled. If it's, for example, your shorts, you'd have your shorts together. Your t-shirts, have your shirts together. Don't just put your kit in a bag, because then you're going to have to dress yourself, and you don't want to do that. If you want to change your shorts, you know where your shorts are. You separate everything out, so it's nice and fast, because all that time, and this is the thing with loops, they're great because you definitely shouldn't be getting lost. But every 10 miles you could be having a lengthy stop, and you've got to try and nip that in the bud and not allow that to happen. That's a great example of where the stopwatch comes into play. Every time you got to your tent, you'd hit your stopwatch and say, right, I'm only here 10 minutes, and then try and have that discipline to do that. You can lose bags of time otherwise, because not normally on an ultra would you have so much luxury so frequently. You'd have your food laid out, and also what you can do is you can devise a little system so you know what you've been eating. So if you want a gel every lap, you need to be putting your wrappers in a certain place or whatever, because you'll forget what you're eating and what you're doing. Same if you're taking salt tablets and what have you. And you might have a strategy for every other lap, and you'll think, did I do that last lap or the lap before? So where you place things can tell you when you see it. All right, I know I've done that. But discipline with your amount of time at your HQ would be my biggest thing, and what I'd be telling somebody. Don't squander too long. You need to, you might plan a lengthier break at one of the points, whether it's 50 miles would be logical. But yeah, don't go there unnecessarily. If you don't need to really go there for much other than to top up with water, take a gel, then just do that. Keep moving. It's definitely when people stop and rest that they don't finish things. You get cold very quickly, especially in the night. So you've got to keep it going. But I think that's a great way to do a 100-miler is on a 10-mile loop. If you can handle loops, and I don't mind them, it's a great way to do it. You're not going to get lost. You'll know the route very well by the end. You've got your HQ, you've got all your gear, you've got everything you need. It's perfect.
Cool. Thank you for that. Phil has asked about how much you need to eat to maintain your energy levels over that length of a race. I'm sure that's partially coming into your training as well, because you will have conditioned yourself and for what you need to maintain that.
You definitely want to be trying to train your gut while you're training. So you train with the foods that you are going to be using come your race day. Beginners are going to have a bit of a journey with that, and by a journey I mean by about 10 years you might have it figured out, but it takes time to really kind of get to grasp with what suits you. But train your gut during your training. It can help your body learn to adapt while running and get the nutrients from it. You're not going to beat gels and sports products really, because they give you exactly what you need and nothing excess. If you eat a sandwich, that goes into your gut, and you can only extract X amount of useful calories from that, and then you've got the rest sloshing around in your gut, and then you feel sick. So, but of course, not many people can stomach gels for a 100-miler, and the ones that can do normally win them. But so you're trying to get the balance of what you can stomach, but it's little and often. You can eat proper food, normal food you like. you've got to go towards the sugary, really, because that's, you're topping your glucose and glycogen up all the time. You can't eat enough. You won't get enough in. You should be quite fat adaptive from your volume of training as an ultra runner in your training. So you should be good at burning your fat anyway. You don't have to starve yourself to get good at that. You can eat and you'll still be fat adaptive. That's fine. So come race day, you are going to have a deficit of your calories. You got to acknowledge that. You're just trying to mitigate it little and often, dripping in. Never, just don't eat a big meal. Just don't do this kind of 50-mile fish and chip job. It's insane, and it will do you no favors. It's too much food in one hit. I wouldn't be thinking about meals on a 100-miler. You know, you do that on the 200s and 300s. Because they're more like just expeditions and they're taking a lot longer and you end up walking. But on a 100-miler, even if you are going to walk a significant amount of a 100-miler, don't eat meals. You eat little handfuls of food.
Cool. Tom wants to know, he's asking about training. Due to work and life, my peak week is going to be about 4 weeks out from my race, then a 10-day/2-week taper. Is there any issue with peak week being that close to the event?
Being that close? No, if anything, it's quite far away. I mean, most people's peak week, as I would plan it, you would be 4 to 3 weeks out, and then you'd have a 3 to 2 week taper. So 3 weeks before an event, you'd still be in a peak phase. So that's absolutely fine being 4 weeks out. If anything, you've got to be careful that you don't have too much of a lengthened taper. This is a common error with ultra runners. The taper's too long. You keep your frequency, you keep some intensity in there as well, but you reduce volume. And if you reduce volume too much and too quickly, you feel lethargic. Your body takes it as an opportunity to cleanse, and you get a cold and you don't turn up feeling good. So you keep your frequency. You're out every other day or every day. It's just that you're not running as long as you were, and you keep some intensity in there to stay strong and fit. Otherwise you're detraining. But if he's peak weeks 4 weeks before, that's absolutely fine, but he's just got to stay busy in the build up to the event. Yes, the taper, but keep getting out there. Otherwise it's too long. It's too far otherwise, and you're losing that fitness that you've worked so hard to gain.
Yeah, cool. Related to that, Gemma was asking how long or how many miles should long runs be in training?
Yeah, well, it's kind of question that's going to end up me throwing my Mac out the window, but you'll never really agree with this, but the long run doesn't have to be as long as what people would imagine it to be. You know, if I just throw out there 25 miles, then I'll do that. But around the 6-hour mark, that's why the 6-hour events are really good. Obviously, I just did one on Thursday and I ran 40 miles, so you can go over that, but it depends where you are with it. So your long run will be relative to the individual, but it's not about the long run. Marathon running, of course, they put a lot of pressure and a lot of focus on an emphasis on that long run being 22 miles, 60 miles, whatever it is. It's all about that long run going into the marathon. Ultra running it's not a linear process like that, and hence why there's no real prerequisite that you've got to have done 50 to do 100. They're nothing alike in reality. So it's about your volume. Focus on your volume. If you can run 25 miles and you've got good volume, you can run 100, as mad as that is, but you've got to trust that. You've got to believe in a bit of magic and that you can find that energy to do it. And going longer and longer and longer takes a lot out of your body. It takes longer to recover, so overall your volume's less. It's your frequency and your consistency that makes you a good ultra runner. You're trying to, I consider it like poison. If running was poison and you took too much poison in one hit, it doesn't bode well for you. But if you drip feed poison all the time, and then now and again just a little bit more poison, you compound your fitness. The big mistake in ultra running training is to do a long run on the weekend and then not much of it and then go long again. The body hates that. It's just trauma to the body. It has to then recover, and you're not training in that period, and then it's massive trauma again. the body likes compounding fitness, day on, day in, consistency, working hard with it, and stepstone building your fitness. So try and move away from the emphasis on the long run and bagging that long run, and then having Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday off because you're tired and you're feeling good about yourself because you ran so far. You need the consistency.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way to look at it. I'm sure that's a light bulb for a lot of people, hopefully. Ronnie, we've had lots of questions about feet and about blisters, shoes and socks. Do you have any tips for keeping your feet fit during the race and in training?
Blisters need heat, they need friction, and they need moisture, really. So get rid of your friction, get rid of your heat, and get rid of the moisture is your 3-step plan. The shoes you're in will matter. You don't want them slopping around too much, i.e. there seems to be this huge obsession in ultra running about having shoes massive for you, as though your feet swell so much. It's not been my experience. I know feet can swell, and each individual will be different, but in my experience, you don't swell up 2 sizes unless you're running 1,500 mile. I can appreciate that. So be careful with the whole size up thing of how much you size up. Maybe half a size, maybe a size is where I'd suggest you leave that. Fantastic running socks is what you want. Find what works for you. Use them in training. Great wicking socks. Be amazed how many runners scrimp on the socks because they don't want to pay £20 for a pair of socks, which I completely understand, but pay the £20 for the socks because they make the difference. So great socks, that'll help with the moisture. Having the right footwear for you will help reduce the friction and the heat. There's not always a lot you can do about heat, but some people wear Glide on the feet and anti-lubricant. Some people will tape and pre-tape the feet, which then can affect. That's why you size up if you're going to wear tape. The other big thing is what I would suggest, and I came onto this quite late, is have a pedicure. Have your feet on a fairly regular basis to clean off the dead skin. Now everybody's in a different camp, and some say you want the dead skin, you want the hardened skin, but there's a balance to it. You want some, you don't want all virgin skin on your feet, of course, before 100 miler. But in my experience, it's the hard skin that gives you the heat and the friction. And when you get rid of that by a professional, taking that off a few weeks before or a month before your event, so then you run on that again, you've got a beautiful combination of hardened and soft skin, and it's just what you need. Whenever I've had trench foot, it's because my feet was too hard and the moisture built up beneath that layer, and it's almost like your skin separates because the hard skin was dead and it was doing me no favors once that broke down. But that's on the real long distance. In summary, you should not be getting blisters, even on a 100 miler. You should not. They're not normal, and you shouldn't have to tolerate them. You need to find a way around it. Some people have really ugly feet, and that doesn't help because they get all these corns and their feet rub on stuff. But do everything you can to mitigate it. It's not part and parcel of it. Yes, it can happen if it's wet, but they're not standard. You can run 100 miles and not get a blister.
That's great. I've got one more question, and then we're gonna let everybody go. This is from Karen. If you're training for a flat ultra, how would you build in the best places to walk, given that you would normally use uphills for this? And maybe, I don't know if you want to talk about how much of 100 miler you're likely to walk, because walking plays a really big part.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think some people use run walk strategies, and Jeffing is a whole concept of the run walk concept. I think I don't like that because I don't like bleeping, so I don't like a watch telling me what to do for starters. I've got a problem with authority, I think. But if you can just build it in naturally, I think that works a lot better. So and do it early, get the walking in early. So the worst question to get asked, or the most dangerous one, is, shall I just run until I can't run no more and then walk? And absolutely, it's not that. So totally don't do that. Sprinkle the walking in just to a nice rhythm. If you can feel your body, and you start, I've been running, a good 20 minutes here, I'll just have a little walk. You've got to chill out, you've got to relax, you've just got to enjoy it. The first 25 miles of a 100-miler, you want to feel like you're not doing yourself justice, like you're just not trying and you're letting yourself down. If you feel like that, you're probably pacing right, because it's going to get very difficult later. I wouldn't try and bag time, because you're going to slow down and get tired anyway. There's a slight, you can do that a tiny bit, but if you do it too much, you slow down so much later, you lose all that time that you bagged in the first 50. So just sprinkle it in. I'd say, roughly be about 25 minutes running and 5 minutes walking, but I'm not telling you to do a strict strategy like that, because even on a flat ultra, you will get slight inclines and declines and stations and all this, where it won't work to do that. I'd only work on a track, really, where it was the same all the time. I think then you could perhaps do that strategy. How much will you walk on a 100-miler? Well, that is really dependent on your ability and your level. There's many first-time 100-mile runners that can run it all, and they do run it all, but you shouldn't see it as a failing to be walking, because it's about locomotion and getting from A to B. Some superstars that take up ultra running come and run a 17-hour 100-miler on their first go. So it's not always can be classified by how experienced you are. But yeah, you could walk half of it. I think to finish in 30 hours on Robin Hood, I think it's 3.5 mile per hour average that gets you that. And so you can imagine, just a slight run walk the whole way, you clear the 3.5 and finish within the 30 hours. So see walking as part of your plan. I'll always have hiking as part of my coaching, run hiking, hike running, to get the transition, because runners struggle if they train as pure runners and then find themselves hiking. A, mentally they feel like they're failing, and you're not, because you're still moving forward. And B, they struggle to then transition between the walking back to the running. So you do what you're going to do in training, and that's the specificity. So train yourself not as a marathon runner, not as a pure runner, but as an ultra runner, and hiking will be a valuable part of that.
Yeah, and part of our pack talks about that. So do stay tuned, because we've got some really good tips for how you can incorporate it into your training. Right, we're slightly over time. So Ronnie, thank you so much. That's been really, really useful, really interesting. I hope you guys have all found it really helpful as well. We have been recording, so we'll share on social once the video is ready to view. And yeah, check out the pack on Harrier. And yeah, good luck to everyone with your training, and we'll see you soon. Bye.
Thank you, guys.